Ready for a deep dive? Buckle up, because today we're exploring a future that's closer than you might think.
A future that's already unfolding around us.
Exactly. We're diving deep into the exponential era, strategies to stay ahead of the curve.
By David Espindola and Michael Wright. It's a really thought-provoking look at how we perceive change and how technology is accelerating at a pace that, well, it can be kind of hard to wrap your head around.
And that's exactly why we're here, to unpack these ideas and figure out what it all means for us.
Right.
So one of the first things that jumped out at me was this idea that humans think linearly,
But technology advances exponentially.
and that mismatch can be a real problem.
It is. It's a major blind spot for a lot of people, a lot of businesses. We
And-
tend to think in straight lines, but technology doesn't play by those rules.
And Espindola and Wright use this great story to illustrate this point, the one about the chessboard and the grains of rice.
Ah, yes. The emperor who underestimated the power of doubling, a classic example of how our intuition fails us when it comes to exponential growth. You know, it seems harmless at first,
One grain of rice on the first square,
two on the next.
and so on.
But by the time you get to the last square, well, you're talking about more rice than exists in the entire world.
It's a powerful metaphor for how quickly things can escalate when you're dealing with exponential growth.
Absolutely. And the key takeaway for us is that in this era, those seemingly small changes, they can quickly snowball into massive disruptions.
So how do we bridge this gap between our linear thinking and the exponential pace of change? How do we even begin to wrap our heads around it?
Well, one way is to understand the phases of exponential growth. Espindola and Wright break it down really clearly.
They talk about the initial inflection window where things seem to be moving slowly.
Right, almost flat.
Then you hit the turning point,
And suddenly, boom, the curve shoots upward.
and things start changing really fast.
Exactly. And we've seen this happen time and time again.
Like with the Human Genome Project, right?
Perfect example. Sequencing the first human genome, I mean, that cost billions of dollars and it took years. Now it can be done for a fraction of the cost and in a fraction of the time, all thanks to the speed of technological advancement.
And it's not just one technology, is it? It's the convergence of multiple technologies
Yeah.
that makes this era so disruptive.
Yeah. That's where it gets really interesting. You've got AI, robotics, nanotechnology, 3D printing, all evolving at the same time. It's kind of like a chain reaction of innovation.
And these converging technologies are creating these incredible ecosystems that completely redefine industries and how we live and work.
And how we think. It challenges our assumptions about what's possible.
Speaking of reshaping industries, Espindola and Wright outline 10 megatrends in the book. Flying cars,
Radical life extension.
an actually sustainable environment. Some of these sound like they're straight out of science fiction.
They do, but they're all grounded in real science and current trends.
What really jumps out at you?
I think what's most fascinating is this question of distribution. Will everyone have equal access to these advancements? Or will it exacerbate existing inequalities?
It definitely makes you stop and think about the potential consequences, both good and bad. And speaking of navigating this new world, I love how Espindola and Wright categorize companies as animals of the exponential kingdom. It's such a vivid way to understand how different companies are adapting or not adapting to this new landscape.
It's brilliant. You've got the flashbulb frogs, those companies that fail to see the change coming.
Blockbuster ignoring the rise of streaming is a classic example.
And then there are the disruptive unicorns, these startups that explode onto the scene.
Airbnb revolutionizing hospitality, or ByteDance, which most people haven't heard of, building a media empire driven by AI. It's mind-boggling how quickly these companies can scale.
Yeah, and you've got the fast and furious gazelles constantly innovating and disrupting. Think Uber and Netflix, always on the move. And we can't forget about the dancing elephants, large companies that manage to adapt, like IBM's turnaround under Lou Gerstner. It's inspiring to see that even giants can learn to dance.
It's a great analogy. You've got the frogs, the unicorns, the gazelles, the elephants. But what I found most surprising is Espindola and Wright's argument that traditional strategic planning is dead. It's simply too slow and rigid for the speed of the exponential era.
Yeah, the old ways of doing things just don't cut it anymore. They propose a new approach called strategic planning for the exponential era, or SPX.
So what does SPX look like in practice? What are the key steps in this new model?
Well, they break it down into 4 key loops. The first is all about detecting early signals, and this is where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. How can you, whether in your business or personal life, Start picking up on those subtle cues that signal change is coming.
It can't just be about reading industry reports, right? Everyone has access to that information.
Right, exactly. They talk about going beyond traditional sources, using things like predictive analytics to mine data, scanning patent databases, even tapping into your own internal CRM data or customer feedback. It's about connecting the dots in unconventional ways.
It makes sense. They bring up the cautionary tales of companies like Xerox and Lucent. What's the lesson there?
It's a reminder that being out of touch with what's really happening can be fatal for a business. They launched major initiatives without truly understanding the changing landscape, and the results were, well, disastrous.
So the key takeaway here is that being in tune with early signals, even if they seem small or insignificant, can be the difference between thriving and becoming a flash-boiled frog.
Absolutely.
What happens once you've detected some of these early signals? What's the next step in the SPX loop?
Then you move into generating insights from the signals you've gathered. It's about bringing together diverse perspectives, thinking laterally, and coming up with creative responses to the signals you've detected.
It sounds a lot more dynamic than sitting around a boardroom table trying to predict the next 5 years.
It is. They also emphasize the importance of experimentation. Think short, low-risk initiatives to test your assumptions.
Almost like a scientist in a lab.
Exactly. Would you agree that embracing failure as a learning opportunity is key here?
Absolutely. There's that famous Thomas Edison quote, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work."
I love that quote. It perfectly captures the spirit of experimentation. And they even suggest using techniques from design thinking, like reframing, to overcome roadblocks. For example, they tell this great story about John and the Grand Canyon mule ride.
That's the one where John was determined to take this mule ride, but he was too heavy, right?
Exactly, and he kept trying to lose weight, but he was so fixated on that one solution that he missed other possibilities. Like, he could have reframed the problem, instead of focusing on the mule ride, he could have focused on seeing the Grand Canyon from top to bottom. There were so many other ways to achieve that.
It's a great analogy for how we can get stuck in our thinking.
And in business, just like with John and the mule ride, getting fixated on one solution can blind you to other, potentially better options.
Right. It's about being open to new possibilities.
And Netflix's early forays into streaming are another great example. They didn't get it right immediately, but they were willing to learn from their initial experiments, adjust, and adapt.
So you've detected early signals, you've generated some insights through brainstorming and experimentation. What's next in the SPX methodology?
The next step is mapping your capabilities.
The essential fuel for riding the exponential curve.
Right, and this is where things get really practical for you, the listener.
They break down capabilities into 5 key areas, right? People, process, technology, markets, and capital.
Exactly. And it's interesting how they emphasize that people and culture are at the heart of it all. They even quote Larry Bossidy,
Who said, "We need to focus on people who can get things done."
right, not just talk a good game. You need people who can execute, who can adapt, who can learn.
It reminds me of the Margaret Thatcher quote they include about the danger of having people in charge who think they know, but are actually mistaken. It's so important to create a culture where people are comfortable challenging each other, where taking risks is encouraged.
Absolutely. And that's where they introduce this concept of category kings.
Companies that define and own a specific market segment.
Exactly. Think of companies like Amazon Web Services.
They took an internal capability, their expertise in cloud computing, and turned it into a whole new market, becoming the category king.
It's a great example.
So once you've assessed your capabilities across those 5 key areas, what's the final piece of the puzzle in this third loop of the SPX methodology?
That's where you bring everything together to develop a risk opportunity capability map, what they call an ROC map.
And what makes this map so useful?
Well, think of it as a visual tool. It helps you prioritize initiatives.
Based on your capabilities and the potential risks and opportunities associated with each.
Exactly. And the goal is to focus on initiatives that have high potential.
And where you already have strong capabilities, or at least a path to develop them.
Exactly. It's about making strategic bets and being willing to invest in the future.
It seems like this ROC map is a really powerful tool for making tough decisions, especially in this fast-paced, ever-changing environment.
It is. It forces you to think strategically and weigh your options carefully.
That leads us perfectly into the 4th loop of the SPX methodology, implementation.
Where the rubber meets the road.
Now we're getting to the part where we actually put a plan into action.
Right.
What are the key considerations when it comes to implementation?
Well, the first thing is to think about the scale and scope of those top priority initiatives you've identified using the ROC map.
And they stress that this isn't about creating these massive, unwieldy projects, right?
No, not at all. It's about starting small, gathering data, and getting feedback quickly. It's about testing the waters before you dive in headfirst.
It's almost like you're running a series of small experiments, constantly iterating and adapting based on what you learn.
Exactly, and even with these small-scale initiatives, they emphasize the need to think about how they will affect different parts of the organization. You need to consider things like customer segments, geographic reach, internal resources.
It seems like you need to be very strategic about how you roll things out, even on a small scale.
Absolutely. And this is where that concept of minimum viable product comes in. You want to create a version of your initiative that's complete enough to test your assumptions, but doesn't require a huge investment of time and resources.
It's about being agile and iterative, learning from those early experiments, and then scaling up or pivoting as needed.
Right. And they highlight the fact that in this era of AI and automation, scale and scope take on a whole new dimension.
With the right technology, you can achieve things today that were unimaginable just a few years ago.
Absolutely.
It's almost like the possibilities are limitless, which can be both exciting and a little overwhelming.
Yeah, how do you decide what to focus on? Well, that's where that constant feedback loop becomes so important. As you gather data and feedback, you're constantly reevaluating your priorities.
So you're essentially treating your strategic plan as a living document, not something that's set in stone.
Exactly. They even suggest having informal, ongoing strategy reviews.
Instead of these rigid, scheduled ones.
Right. And they even quote Jack Welch on this about how informality fosters candor. It encourages people to speak their minds.
It's about creating a culture of open communication and feedback.
Exactly. And as you're reviewing your progress, they say you have three main choices for each initiative: scale it up, terminate it, or modify it based on the feedback you've received.
It sounds like it takes a lot of discipline to kill initiatives that aren't working, even if you've invested time and resources in them.
It does, but they argue that it's essential. Otherwise, you risk spreading yourself too thin and missing out on bigger opportunities.
So we've walked through the 4 loops of the SPX methodology: detecting early signals, generating insights, mapping capabilities, and implementing in a way that allows for constant feedback and adaptation. It's a lot to take in, but it seems like a really robust framework for navigating this complex and ever-changing world.
It is. And all of this sits on top of two really important foundational elements: culture and behaviors, and executive engagement.
Let's talk about those. What do Estendola and Wright have to say about culture and behaviors in this new era?
They argue that culture and behaviors are the software that runs the organization.
And they need to be aligned with the realities of the exponential era.
Right. Otherwise, you're trying to run cutting-edge software on an outdated operating system.
So what does that mean in practical terms? What kind of culture do you need to thrive in this environment?
It's about embracing change, encouraging experimentation, and fostering a growth mindset. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe to take risks, to fail, and to learn from their mistakes.
And they say that leaders need to embody this change-embracing culture, right? It's about walking the talk.
Absolutely. It starts from the top.
Yeah.
They say CEOs need to set the tone, be visible, accessible, and actively involved in driving change.
And it's not just about giving orders.
Right.
They talk about the importance of persuasion, of getting the whole organization aligned around a shared vision.
It's about creating a sense of excitement and purpose, getting everyone on board with the idea that change is not just inevitable, it's an opportunity.
Right.
And this is where they introduce that fascinating concept from computer science, the explore-exploit dilemma.
Ah, yes, the explore-exploit dilemma. Tell me more about that.
Well, they use the Gittins Index to demonstrate how, in a rapidly changing environment, exploration actually leads to greater long-term rewards.
Okay, so walk me through that. What does that mean in practical terms?
Imagine you're investing in new technology. In the past, you might have focused on short-term gains, going with the tried and true. But the Gittins Index suggests that in this rapidly changing world, exploring new, potentially disruptive technologies can yield a higher long-term payoff.
Even if they don't offer immediate profits.
Exactly. It's about embracing a portfolio approach to innovation.
So it's like that saying, the greatest risk is not taking one.
Exactly.
But how do you balance this need for exploration with the need to make decisive choices?
That's a great point.
It seems like you could end up chasing every shiny new object and never actually accomplishing anything.
You could, and that's why Espindola and Wright argue that you need to have a clear strategic framework in place, like the SPX methodology.
It's about being strategic in your experimentation, not just randomly trying things.
Exactly. And they highlight companies like Adobe with its Kickbox program as examples of how to foster innovation. It's so interesting how they're constantly looking for new ways to empower their employees to be creative and to experiment.
It is. But even with a culture of experimentation, you need to know when to quit, right? How do you decide which experiments to double down on and which ones to abandon?
That's where they bring in the concept of optimal stopping and the 37% rule. It's a fascinating concept.
Yeah, fill me in. What's that all about?
It comes from a mathematical problem called the secretary problem. And it essentially suggests that when you're faced with a series of choices, you should explore the first 37% of your options
And
and then choose the next best option that comes along.
so it's about balancing exploration with decisiveness.
Exactly.
It's about knowing when to cut your losses and move on to the next thing.
Right. And they argue that this principle can be applied to all sorts of decisions, hiring employees.
Choosing strategic initiative.
Exactly. It's a reminder that speed and decisiveness are just as important as creativity and innovation.
So we've covered culture and behaviors and how important it is to cultivate a mindset of exploration and adaptation.
Right.
What about that other foundational element? Executive engagement. What does that look like in practice?
It's about leaders being present, visible, and getting their hands dirty.
They need to be actively involved in driving change.
Exactly. They stress that leaders need to get out of the office, talk to customers, talk to frontline employees.
They need to be connected to the reality of the business, not just the theory.
Absolutely. And it's not just about gathering information. It's about building relationships, inspiring trust, and fostering a sense of shared purpose. People need to see that their leaders are invested in the journey.
And they also highlight the importance of coaching, of passing on knowledge and experience.
It's about creating a culture of continuous learning, not just at the individual level, but at the organizational level as well.
So we've explored the SPX methodology, the key elements of culture, behaviors, and executive engagement. It's a lot to digest, but I think Estendola and Wright provide a really compelling framework for navigating this complex and ever-changing world. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway for our listeners so far?
I think the key message is that the exponential era is not something to be feared. It's a time of unprecedented opportunity, but it requires a shift in mindset. It's about being proactive, adaptable, and constantly learning.
It's about embracing change as an opportunity, not a threat. And it's about remembering that we're all in this together.
Exactly. And, one of the things that really struck me as we were prepping for this deep dive was Espindola and Wright's discussion of unintended consequences.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is. It is. It's like we're so focused on the potential benefits of all this amazing technology, but we don't always stop to think about the potential downside.
Right, just like that old saying, be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. And they offer some really compelling examples that make you pause and think. Like they talk about the rise of tribalism, which is kind of ironic considering we have all these tools for global connection.
It's true, we have more ways to connect with people around the world than ever before, yet we often seem more divided than ever.
Right. It's a real paradox.
So how do they explain that? How can we be so connected and yet so divided at the same time?
Well, they argue that the same technologies that connect us can also create echo chambers.
Where we're only exposed to information that reinforces our existing beliefs.
Exactly. And social media algorithms, they're designed to keep us engaged, but they often end up reinforcing our biases and limiting our exposure to different perspectives.
It's like we're trapped in our own little filter bubbles.
Exactly. And this can lead to a real lack of understanding and empathy for people who hold different views.
And it can make it really difficult to have productive conversations about important issues.
Absolutely. And they challenge us to think about how we can use technology to create a more inclusive and informed society.
Instead of one that's increasingly fragmented and divided.
Right. How can we use these tools to bridge divides rather than deepen them?
It's a crucial question.
Mm.
And it brings to mind another challenge they highlight, which is information overload.
Oh, yeah.
We're constantly bombarded with information from all sides.
It's overwhelming.
It is. It can be really difficult to filter out the noise and find the signal.
Absolutely. And it can lead to a sense of anxiety and overwhelm.
So how do we navigate this information deluge? How do we make sense of it all?
They emphasize the importance of developing critical thinking skills and media literacy. Learning to evaluate sources, identify bias, distinguish between fact and opinion. It's more important now than ever before.
I think that's a skill set that we could all benefit from sharpening, especially in this age of deep fakes and misinformation. It's hard to know what to believe sometimes.
It is. It's like you have to be a detective, always questioning, always digging deeper.
So we've talked about unintended consequences, tribalism, information overload, and echo chambers. It can all feel a bit overwhelming. But Espindola and Wright also offer a message of hope, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. They remind us that we have the power to shape the future.
Technology is ultimately a tool, and it can be used for good or for bad.
Right. We have agency in how all of this unfolds. We're not just passive bystanders.
That's a powerful reminder. It's about making conscious choices about how we develop and use technology, and about being aware of the potential consequences of our actions.
Exactly. And they argue that the key to navigating this new era is to embrace a mindset of continuous learning and adaptation.
Be proactive, anticipate change, constantly adjust your course, just like that SPX methodology suggests.
Right, exactly.
And it's not just about the technology, is it?
No, it's about people
It's about culture.
and leadership. We can't just focus on the tools. We need to focus on the humans using them.
Absolutely. What are their thoughts on what leadership looks like in this era?
Well, one of their most interesting points is that the days of the heroic leader are over. The leader who has all the answers and single-handedly guides the organization to success.
Yeah, the lone wolf at the top.
Exactly. They argue that in this complex and rapidly changing environment, leadership is more about collaboration
About empowering teams.
and fostering a culture of continuous learning.
So it sounds like humility and adaptability are becoming much more valuable leadership traits.
Exactly. And they highlight some really interesting examples of leaders who successfully navigated this shift, like Satya Nadella at Microsoft.
I remember reading about how Nadella's been praised for his ability to transform Microsoft's culture
He really has. He's moved them away from that old know-it-all mentality.
and embraced a more collaborative and innovative approach.
Right. He's created a space for experimentation and learning.
It's inspiring to see that even large, established organizations can adapt. But it seems to require a real shift in mindset, both at the individual and organizational level.
It does. And it's not just about changing your internal processes. It's about changing your relationship with the outside world. They talk about being externally focused.
Staying connected to your customers, your partners, and the broader ecosystem.
Exactly. You can't operate in a vacuum in this era. You need to be constantly scanning the horizon for new trends, new technologies, and new competitors.
So how do you do that? What are their suggestions for staying ahead of the curve?
Well, they stress the importance of understanding the forces that are shaping your industry, anticipating change, and being proactive in adapting. And they emphasize that this is an ongoing process.
It's not a one-time event.
Right. It's about continuous learning, continuous improvement, always staying one step ahead.
They highlight Amazon as a prime example of a company that's mastered this approach, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. They're constantly experimenting, launching new products and services, iterating based on feedback, and they're not afraid to fail.
They embrace failure as a learning opportunity.
Exactly.
It sounds like they embody that fast and furious gazelle mentality.
Yeah.
What other companies do they mention?
Well, they also point to Google, which is, famous for its fail-fast mentality, and they've been incredibly successful in adapting to the rapid pace of change in the tech industry.
It's a good reminder that we can look to these innovative companies for inspiration and guidance. But I'm also curious about what they have to say about the future of humanity itself. How do we as individuals adapt and thrive in this rapidly changing world?
That's a great question, and they definitely address that. They argue that we're entering a period of unprecedented change, a period where the very nature of what it means to be human is being challenged.
It can be a bit daunting to think about.
It can, but it's also incredibly exciting, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. They talk about the potential for technologies like artificial intelligence and biotechnology to enhance our capabilities in ways we can barely imagine today. It makes you wonder, what will our lives look like in 50 or 100 years? What will humanity itself look like?
It's mind-blowing to contemplate. They even explore the possibility of merging with machines, of becoming transhuman.
It sounds like science fiction.
It does. But they argue that these possibilities are closer than we think.
Those are some profound and potentially unsettling ideas.
They are.
What are the ethical implications of these technologies? What does it mean to be human in a world where we can enhance our physical and cognitive abilities?
Those are questions that we're only just beginning to grapple with. And Espindola and Wright don't pretend to have all the answers, but they encourage us to start having these conversations now.
Before these technologies become even more powerful.
Exactly. It's a call to be more conscious and deliberate about the future we're creating. It's not about simply letting technology lead the way. It's about actively shaping it to align with our values and aspirations.
It's about being proactive, not reactive.
Exactly. And they remind us that we're not powerless in the face of these changes.
We have the ability to choose how we use technology.
And to create a future that benefits all of humanity.
Not just a select few. One of the things I found most helpful in the book was their discussion of the skills and mindsets we need to develop in order to thrive in this era.
Oh, absolutely.
What are some of the key things they highlight?
Well, they talk about critical thinking, creativity, adaptability, and resilience. These are the skills that are going to be essential for navigating a world that's increasingly complex, uncertain, and ambiguous.
So it's not just about hard skills, it's about these softer skills as well.
Right. The ability to learn quickly, to adapt to new situations, to bounce back from setbacks, these are going to be crucial.
It seems like those are skills that are becoming increasingly valuable in all aspects of life, not just in the workplace.
Absolutely. It's about being a lifelong learner, being comfortable with uncertainty, and being willing to embrace new challenges.
Do they talk about education? How does education need to adapt to this new world
Oh, they do. They suggest that we need to rethink the way we educate our children.
to prepare them for a world that's changing at an exponential pace?
Right. The traditional models of education, with their emphasis on rote memorization and standardized testing, they're just not going to cut it.
So what do we need to be teaching our kids?
We need to be fostering creativity, critical thinking, problem-solving skills, and the ability to collaborate effectively. We need to be teaching them how to learn, not just what to learn.
Because what they learn today might be obsolete tomorrow.
Exactly. And one of the most important skills they highlight is the ability to learn from failure.
Which can be a tough one, right?
It can be.
Especially in a culture that often stigmatizes failure.
Right. But in this fast-paced environment, failure is inevitable. It's going to happen.
It's how you respond to those failures that matters.
Exactly. So it's about embracing failure as a learning opportunity, about iterating and adapting based on feedback, and about not being afraid to take risks.
It's about shifting our perspective, viewing setbacks as stepping stones to success.
Absolutely. And they highlight some really interesting examples of companies and individuals who have successfully embraced this mindset. Like James Dyson, the inventor of the Dyson vacuum cleaner, he famously went through over 5,000 prototypes before he finally perfected his design.
Wow, talk about perseverance.
I know, right? It's a reminder that resilience is essential for success, especially when you're trying to innovate and create something new.
And they tie this back to the idea of the growth mindset, right?
Exactly. It's about believing that you can always learn and grow no matter what challenges you face. It's about seeing obstacles as opportunities for growth and being willing to step outside of your comfort zone.
So it's not just about adapting to the world as it is, it's about actively shaping the world we want to live in.
Right. And I think Espindola and Wright offer a really valuable framework for doing that, for developing those skills and mindsets, and for creating a future that's both prosperous and meaningful.
It's a challenging but also an incredibly exciting time to be alive, wouldn't you agree?
I absolutely agree.
So we've talked about the challenges and opportunities of the exponential era. We've explored Espindola and Wright's SPX methodology for navigating this complex new world. And we've talked about the importance of developing a new set of skills and mindsets. It's been a whirlwind tour, but I think we've covered some really important ground today.
I agree. There's so much packed into this book.
We could talk about it for hours.
We could, but I think we've hit on some of the key themes and insights.
And I hope our listeners are feeling informed, engaged, and empowered to take action.
I hope so too.
What are your thoughts? What do you think are the key takeaways here?
I think one of the most important takeaways is that this isn't just about passively observing change, it's about actively shaping it. We have a choice in how we respond to these rapid advancements in technology, and we have a responsibility to use those advancements for good.
Absolutely. And I think Espindola and Wright give us a powerful framework for doing just that. Their SPX methodology, combined with their insights into culture, leadership, and the skills we need to thrive, provides a roadmap for navigating this complex landscape.
It's a call to action. A challenge to be more conscious, more deliberate, and more courageous in the way we approach the future. It's about taking ownership of our role in shaping what's to come.
And one of the most important points they make is that the future isn't predetermined.
It's something we create day by day through our choices and actions.
Exactly. The future is not something that happens to us, it's something we create.
And I think that's a really empowering message. It really is. It's about recognizing that we have a responsibility to use these powerful technologies for good, to address the challenges we face, and to create a future that's sustainable, equitable, and just.
That's a great point. And it brings to mind another important aspect they highlight: synchronous global communication. We can now communicate with anyone, anywhere in real time, but they suggest this has both positive and negative consequences.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
It is.
On the one hand, it allows for incredible collaboration and connection, breaking down geographical barriers. But on the other hand, it also creates this potential for information overload, echo chambers, and even manipulation.
It's like we're all connected, yet also more susceptible to being influenced by those who control the flow of information. So how do we navigate this complex landscape? How do we make sure that we're using these tools for good and not being manipulated by them?
Well, they argue that we need to be more discerning about the information we consume and the sources we trust. It's about developing media literacy skills
Being aware of our own biases.
and actively seeking out diverse perspectives.
It's about being critical thinkers, not just passive consumers of information.
Exactly.
They also raise concerns about the potential for technological unemployment.
Right.
Automation and AI are rapidly changing the nature of work, and many jobs that exist today may not exist tomorrow. It's a little bit scary to think about, honestly.
It is a valid concern. But they also offer a message of hope. They argue that while some jobs may be lost, new jobs will be created. The key is to be adaptable, to embrace lifelong learning, and to develop the skills that will be in demand in the future.
It makes sense.
It does.
And they also explore the potential for AI and VR to revolutionize education, making it more personalized and engaging.
Oh, yeah, there's so much potential there.
There is.
Yeah.
But they also caution against the potential for bias in algorithms.
Right. We have to be careful about that.
It seems like every technological advancement comes with a set of challenges and opportunities we need to carefully consider.
It's a constant balancing act. And they remind us that technology is a tool.
It can be used for good or for bad.
Exactly. It's up to us to decide how we use it, to shape its development, and to ensure that it serves humanity's best interests.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the exponential era, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? What do they really need to remember as they navigate this new world?
I think the most important message is that the exponential era is not something to be feared, but rather something to be embraced. It's a time of unprecedented opportunity, but it requires a shift in mindset, both at the individual and organizational level.
It's about being proactive, adaptable, and constantly learning. It's about embracing change as an opportunity, not a threat. And it's about remembering that we're all in this together.
I completely agree. The challenges and opportunities of the exponential era are too big for any one person or organization to tackle alone. It's going to take all of us working together to create a future that we can all be proud of.
Espindola and Wright provide a powerful framework for thinking about these issues and taking action. It's a call to be more conscious, more deliberate, and more courageous in the way we approach the future. They challenge us to think big, to embrace the unknown, and to believe that anything is possible.
It's a reminder that the future is not something that happens to us. It's something we create. Every decision we make, every action we take, shapes the world we live in and the world we leave behind for future generations.
So, as we conclude our exploration of the exponential era, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. The future is not predetermined. It's a blank canvas, and we are the artists. What will you create?